As I'm sure many of you know, the aim of the Foresight programme is really to look into the future on major issues that are going to be affecting our future, and particularly focusing on the science and engineering questions that are posed. And some of you will know some of the recent successes in the Foresight project. The project that was reporting around about this time last year on obesity, and earlier ones on flooding and so on, have had enormous traction. And I feel very confident that the project we've actually got this afternoon, that is going to be launched today and is going to be discussed this afternoon, is going to be a similar winner. Just a little bit more about the Foresight projects. They involve essentially a team of experts, and that's the team over there, sort of sat down there, and this team was led by Carrie Cooper. But they also involve a stakeholder group. Don't think that needs much saying, but it also involves sponsorship by a minister. The initial sponsorship of this particular project was from Bill Rammell, but with the government reshuffle, I'm very glad to say that John Denham has agreed to be the sponsorship of this report, and John is actually going to be joining us a little later during the afternoon, and will actually chair the final session. So that's where we are today. I think in terms of this particular study, it's drawn on the state of the art across a wide range of disciplines, as indeed it had to. It's an enormously wide project, and those of you who've actually seen or indeed can carry the report will realise quite how extensive it is. But it's used all the sort of disciplines that you might have expected: economics and the social sciences, neuroscience and genetics, psychology and psychiatry, education and occupational health, and the more applied fields. There were more than 80 detailed studies, which are actually published on the Foresight website, and it's involved 400 experts inputting to the project and from 16 separate countries. And I think the points that I would now like to make are a little bit more detail about this particular project, which I think, as I say, is extraordinarily exciting. But first of all, it's sort of an explanation of the title of this project, because when I walked in the door as Chief Scientific Advisor early in January of this year, I said, what on earth is this all about? Mental capital, what's that mean? And fortunately, having our expert team and the Foresight team themselves, it's possible to actually do it. And one of the analogies that I think is really important to actually use for mental capital is that of banking. Not an entirely fashionable or propitious analogy at this current time, but I think what we are looking for is to think, and suggesting as an analogy, is think of mental capital as a bank account in which individual actions and issues can actually affect that. So if an individual has the benefit of for example, a good and loving parenting or excellent education, that has the potential to enhance that individual's mental capital. And then as you go through the life course, events, whether they're tragedies or illness and so on, have the potential to actually erode that capital. So you can actually think, and I think it's quite a useful way of dealing with this idea of mental capital, and that in a sense, the well-being issue is part of the ability of that mental capital to, in a sense, generate interest. I think I'm possibly extending this analogy a little bit too far, but forgive me, and I'm sure our experts, when they talk, can actually query that in an appropriate way. But the sort of issues that we therefore hope that the team have been looking at go across the whole of the life course of an individual, really from conception through to the grave. Conception being not rather than birth, being this because of serious issues about mother's health during a pregnancy can actually affect the initial mental capital that children start with, and fetal alcohol syndrome and problems of that sort, or smoking during pregnancy, can actually have a genuine physical effect on this. And the project actually looks at the whole life course of the individual, and that has implications that are really quite intriguing, both for government and for the way in which we actually deal with these problems. Because by starting, if you think about an individual and looking at the mental capital of that individual through their individual life course, investment, for example, in trying to prevent dyslexia or dyscalculia, which Usha will be talking about a little in more detail later, will actually have an effect on that individual, but that effect will, on the mental capital of that individual, will not just be for the initial years. It will come as they move into the educational system. It will come into the work system some 10 or 20 years later. And indeed, it will actually come in as that individual moves into late adulthood, and where the issues of ways in which one can mitigate the potential mental diseases of old age and dementia and so on can actually be seriously mitigated and, if not prevented, improved upon by, for example, the ability to learn. So the very fact that you have an investment at that stage means that, at the stage of the young, means that the benefits accrue through that, in that individual's lifetime, in their mental capital and in their well-being that they're able to generate in the way they live. By well-being, I don't just mean happiness, and Felicia will be talking about that in a little while. So this is what I think is so exciting about it, and it poses a very interesting question for government, which is to say, essentially investment in mental capital and the improvement in mental capital by one department is likely to have a benefit to another department some years later. So the simple model of whether in fact departmental investment improves the performance of that department is actually eroded by this model. And we need to think, and government, we pose the question appropriately in this foresight study, we need to actually pose that question to government and think about how changes to address these issues will actually be developed. Why now? And I'll flip through to my first slide. Why the project was undertaken now? First of all, there are enormous problems that are actually occurring out here. Taking the first one, we have been successful in improving longevity, but that has enormous implications, and Barbara will talk about it a little bit later, in terms of the age structure of our population. We will be a population which has many more older people in it, and the fact that dementia and other related diseases actually are directly related to age means that the burden of this on society will be significantly larger. Similarly, changes in the global economy and the world of work, and particularly some of the late changes that we've actually seen as the global economy nearly collapsed and governments have nationalized banks throughout the world, and we actually have a major change and an expected serious problems of economic well-being over the next few years, is going to imply more people in unemployment and more people in debt. And one of the parts of the study that Rachel will be and others will be talking about is, in fact, one of the major causes of mental ill health in adulthood is both unemployment, but also, very importantly, and that seems to be even more significant, is debt. And she will expand upon that. And of course, this changing nature of our society, and we have looked at the sort of issues that we have to look at. For example, the lack of ability to read or to count is reflected in employment prospects. It's reflected in the proportion of the population that are actually in the prison. Enormously higher proportions actually are in prison who actually have both dyslexia and dyscalculia compared with the population at large. So this is important, and we need to be thinking about how that's addressed, and it poses really difficult questions for government how to address that, and we're doing that. And finally, I think some of the issues that I really would like to focus on too here, and I think Barbara will explain some of these and Rachel in some more detail, is the fact that we've actually used not just social science, but we've actually used some of the fundamental cutting-edge science in both biology and neurobiology. It is possible to actually have biomarkers that will actually, which can indicate the likelihood of whether people will have depression, whether people will actually have dementia, and these biomarkers have the ability to actually focus and say, you can assess for individuals what is the probability that they will actually succumb to these diseases, and then think about ways to mitigate that and ways to address it. And there's lots of ways. In the workplace, as Carrie will speak about, there's lots of ways that one can actually mitigate this, and you can actually think about how, when you are actually dealing with those with potential for dementia, what those interventions were. And you may have seen in the press today the idea that sort of essentially like the equivalent of five helpings of vegetable and fruit in one's diet to avoid obesity,